And the best way to maximize speed or maximize progress is to minimize work so we can stay on track and we can course correct really quickly. And by the way, airlines run this way every day. Airlines are immediately off course when they get into the air, and they're constantly taking their bearings. The wind is blowing them sideways. That's why autopilot is so impressive, because it's constantly course correcting. Now, a mistake that a lot of teams sometimes make is by accepting work into the software team that varies in size. Okay. So assuming that we have the next bit of work that we think is going to be valuable, the next valuable changes, sometimes the work comes in and some items we know just intuitively, oh, that's really small. That's not going to take any time at all. And then others come in and say, oh, that's a big item. That's not going to be quick. Now, using estimation techniques in our industry hasn't really panned out for our industry. Hasn't worked. Planning poker, estimating by Fibonacci numbers, it hasn't actually worked in practice across the industry. Now, what has worked is using Kanban's WIP limits, or work in process limits, and standardizing the work size. Now, there are plenty of teams who started with planning poker, maybe using Fibonacci numbers or whatnot, and then they realized above a 1, 2, or a 3, the estimate just isn't worth much at all because there's so much you can't see. So even people who have employed estimation and actually become good at this found that they had to ignore estimates that were not really small anyway. Okay. So what has worked is work in process limits and standardizing the work size. Let's talk about that. What has not worked? No, let me say it a different way. We don't want to push work into the development team that's more than one man day of effort. Before we put hands on the keyboard, ahead of coding, changes and new features, you want to break them up into units of development that are no bigger than one day of effort. Okay. Our industry has learned that if a unit of work is estimated at 2 weeks, it'll be about 4 weeks or more. If it's estimated at 2 days, it'll be 4. There's so many people that get an estimate for somebody. What do? They immediately double it because we all know that nobody's good at estimating. And there are some scientifically proven, reliable methods of estimating, but they require special training and they're not very widely adopted. So if they're not widely adopted or widely trained, then effectively they're not being used by most teams. Feature points is one of those. And I had Capers Jones on the Azure DevOps podcast talking about that. And from an empirical standpoint, it's actually a very good estimation technique for large projects, but it requires special training. And most development teams, because the industry has exploded, so many companies have developers these days, but the vast majority, I would say almost all of them, are not going to staff somebody who's specially trained in function points estimation. And there's no other form of estimation that actually works. And so another practice that works as a substitute is just breaking it down and splitting up the work. Now, splitting up the work does ensure that we understand the work and that we've decided on design elements of its implementation. Because once coding begins on something, we don't want to have to stop it because of a gap in understanding. We need to keep up the pace or else our team is going to move really slowly. And if something is going to run long, then it's better that a one-day item run for 2 days, allowing us the opportunity to shift gears, get a better understanding, or abort it if we realize, oh yeah, now that we've gotten into it, this is really going to take the whole month. It's like, no, then we're not doing it. Let's do something else. We want to stop the bleeding if that happens. Now, on larger items that we're going to allocate a week or 2 weeks because that was the estimate, well, we don't find out that it's not going to work or that it's actually 3 months of effort. What, until a whole month's gone by? That doesn't work. So smaller items gives us more opportunity to course correct. We also minimize work through simple, known designs that we've implemented before, design patterns that are trained across the industry, and also by reusing defect-free components. So NuGet is your friend. Now you don't want to grab just any library that's not being used by anybody, but the well-used libraries with high ratings that tons of people are using, those libraries have already been debugged. They work, they do a good job. And so the more we can reuse those, the better. And commercial components, those are tremendous. There are so many fantastic commercial components out there, way better than taking a general purpose developer and say, hey, try to write something that's almost as good as Infogestics Grid or TreeView or something like that. No, just use the commercial component. Finally, refactoring is our friend. It keeps the code base easy to understand. The point of refactoring, and listen to this, the whole point of refactoring is to make a change and have the resulting code be as if this new feature were planned to be in the software all along. Okay. We want to change the software so it doesn't look like a bolt-on or doesn't look like an afterthought, but it looks like it was meant to be that way from the start. That's a good quality refactoring.